Welcome to the Polish Podcast, where we embolden women to live out their faith in every aspect of their life, including the workplace. I'm your host, Jane Doerman, and I'm thrilled to have you with us. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button to join our community of ambitious women who are committed to growing in their leadership and faith. At Polish Network, we believe your work is more than just a job, it's a calling. We're here to provide the connections you crave, development you deserve, and the gospel that you need to thrive. Each episode features inspiring conversations with women who are leading with their faith in the workplace. Our goal is to ignite your passion and equip you to lead with wisdom and courage. So let's jump into today's episode. What does it truly mean to lead boldly in response to God's calling? Leading boldly isn't just about confidence or charisma. It's about having the courage to follow where God leads, especially when the path ahead feels uncertain. It's asking ourselves, are we willing to step into the unknown, trusting that God's plans are far greater than anything we could envision? Are we ready to embrace the bigness of what He has in store for us, even when we can't fully see the way forward? Today's guest knows this journey intimately. Joanna Meyer, the executive director and founder of Women Work and Calling, a national initiative of the Denver Institute for Faith and Work, and the author of Women Work and Calling, has made it her mission to equip and inspire women to fully embrace their God-given purpose. Through her work, she empowers women to boldly respond to God's call in their careers and communities. Joanna's passion for this mission comes from her own remarkable leadership journey, and today, she's here to share that story with us.
Well, I think more than any single experience, my journey of understanding what it looked like to respond to God's call is more reflective of where I've needed to be bold. I have what I call a patchwork quilt of career. I spent about 12 years working in campus ministry and loved that. Loved getting to see college students trust the Lord and begin to walk with Him. I worked in the corporate sector for about 4 years and spent a number of years freelancing. And when the economy crashed, I had to become self-employed and I learned how to hustle and earn bread for my work in a bunch of different ways. And I was working on a master's in social entrepreneurship at that time at a Christian business school. And they made us they encouraged us to take a theology of work class. And that was a decisive experience for me because I had been growing and thinking about the breadth with which God works in the world. I had this idea that the gospel is not just personal, it's also cosmic, of Christ working to renew all things. So that kind of theological shift was happening in my life. I was getting a bigger view of God's work in the world. And I took a theology of work class, and it was like a framework snapped into place where I finally had a whole Bible perspective on the role that work or our influence in public lives plays in the broader story of God and His mission in the world. And so that really began to shift the trajectory of my life. And I started teaching about themes related to faith and work at my local church. And that was just as the Denver Institute was getting started. So our founder said, I'm going to hire you to manage events because I want you for work that I need you to do later. And so I had to step into roles where I was ordering catering and setting up chairs and doing name tags and trusting God that those small steps and shifts that He was working, even in obscure jobs, that actually is a reflection of boldness. When I was hustling and doing all kinds of work that wasn't something that I trained for, I was having to learn as I go, as I went. That was part of trusting God boldly. But I think what really the boldness came from is shepherding my own life in that journey. I'm a single woman, and so for me, as a woman with leadership gifts whose life does not follow a roadmap that has typically been laid out for Christian women, I needed to know how to trust God when my life didn't match the example that I've seen. My life does not look at all like my mother or grandmother's lives, my sister's lives. I have a very, very different existence. And so I've had to learn courage in trusting God with those risks, the inherent loneliness that comes from that. And also just like developing, I'm just going to use the language, like developing my badass self. Like I've had to really be brave and be okay with being alone at times and being courageous in how I lead and influence. And so all of those random patchwork quilts and the fingerprints of God leading me forward little by little is a reflection of bold leadership for me.
Ephesians 2:10 reminds us, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." As God has been weaving together the unique pieces of Joanna's life, the thread that holds it all together is her deep trust in his craftsmanship. She has trusted his guidance in her work and continues to rely on his provision in her personal life as a single woman. Joanna challenges us to break free from misconceptions about God's calling, encouraging us to see his purpose in every season.
I think we get ourselves in trouble because we think that God has a singular call for our lives that he will declare in advance. Like he says it and we go do it. We see that example of scripture of when God's spoken to people that way. And really, for the average believer, and I would put both you and I in that camp, the call is responding to Christ's call to follow him. And so it's a whole life response of obedience and daily discernment. And often that calling is discerned in the rearview mirror. As we look at where he has led us in his faithfulness, we begin to see a through line or a pattern, and we go, oh, I can see how God has shaped me in this life and what he shaped me for. But that's very different than like Moses in the burning bush, where God suddenly appears and says, Jane, go do this. And so as we learn to walk with God and have courage and trusting that care for him when we respond to him with our whole lives, we begin to see him working in powerful ways. But that's very different than a lot of our stereotypes about what it looks like to live out our calling.
Joanna's faith has been deeply shaped by her experience as a single woman, a journey that hasn't always matched the expectations of her faith community. This lived experience fuels her passion to serve women like herself, empowering them to boldly follow God's calling no matter where it leads.
It has been a hard journey, and I make a point of mentioning that because there are many, many Christian women, increasing numbers every day of women who experience singleness for longer in their life than they imagined that they would, or maybe never marry at all. I happen to be in midlife, and so a big part of the last decade of my life has been navigating the reality that being a biological mother would not be a part of my life. I had medical issues that meant I had to grieve that. And honestly, that was the hardest thing I'd ever been through in life. And part of it was I wasn't the kind of person that longed for motherhood in the sense that I wasn't buying baby clothes as a 20-year-old when I walked through Target. I have friends, that were stocking away clothing in the anticipation that someday they'd be a mom. That wasn't how I was wired, but I never imagined that I wouldn't be. And I know that there are increasing options. People say, why didn't you adopt, or why didn't you foster? I have other friends that have chosen other ways to become a mom. And I think in the moment in the season, it didn't feel like the right stewardship of my life to make that choice. And so it's not this perfect formula of figuring out how someone's going to satisfy that need, as much as accompanying them in the journey and the pain of whatever it looks like for them. And there are plenty of married women who are wrestling with issues of infertility. And so I think this is a broader conversation. So our point wasn't necessarily talking about that, but I think it's helpful to acknowledge that when we think about whole life stewardship, that when we respond to Christ with all that we are, that encompasses hopes and dreams for relationships. And so for me, bold leadership has been, being okay with sticking out. When I sit at church alone on a Sunday, and I have plenty of friends. It's not lack of friends that's not the reason why I'm sitting by myself at church. Certainly don't lack for friends, but sometimes it's just the reality of what is. And so I think having the courage to be willing to reinvent my life in different stages, and just navigating what solitude of the heart looks like as a single person has been a big part of that. And even just being willing to push the borders of conventional conversations around women and leadership and influence. I'm able to do that because of the uniqueness of my life. I often say that my life demands a richer vision for how women steward their gifts, because I'm not checking those other boxes. I'm not satisfying what is expected. I need better answers. And in the process of pushing, we find that every woman needs a richer vision for how she stewards their gifts. It's good for it's good for all of us, regardless of life stage. And so I think because of being single, I just have had an opportunity to push harder into those areas. And that's scary and hard and rewarding. And it's that reflection of trusting God with your call.
Okay. Joanna piqued my interest here. And as a married woman with kids myself, I got curious. I'm a married woman. You're a single woman. And I very much in this conversation, like I have a lot of single women in my life, and I try to learn from them and try to understand. Because again, from my lived experience, I know what I know and I don't know what I don't know. And I'm curious, with single women in particular, we have quite a few that are connected to the Polish Network, seeking that community, that encouragement, especially when they are most likely working, working a full-time job, no matter what area. Could you educate us here for what are like some common barriers or challenges that single women face, especially in relationship to like leading boldly within their spaces they're called to?
Well, one, I just want to say thank you for your curiosity. I wish we lived in physical proximity to each other, because I think we'd have a good time hanging out.
I think so too.
I just have enjoyed our time getting to know each other as we prepared for the podcast. But I think one of the best gifts that married women can offer is curiosity. And I find one of the challenges in faith communities is that sometimes I'll end up in spaces where they kind of just are default married or default kids. And a person's primary point of reference, their main conversation is always around those relational roles. And I say that as somebody who's become a student of the needs of my married friends. Like for me to have friends means my friends will have kids. That's just the reality of it. And so part of just like loving my friends is celebrating their kids and understanding the challenges and pressures that they face as moms. And I love getting to do that. I've become a richer person by journeying with them through those experiences. So that's not a hard thing at all. It's a joy. Where it does get hard is where you end up in things like group situations where the conversations default into conversations about limited roles and it's hard to participate. And that would be an encouragement for women who are in leadership or in social spaces like that. Like you have the ability to shift a conversation so easily, or to ask a question that's more inclusive. If you see the conversation turning to wedding dresses. That happened to me in a small group not that long ago. People were passing around pictures of their wedding dresses at a brunch. And I was like, wow, this is really disrespectful to the variety of people at this table. So that's a very practical example, just showing being curiosity. As far as courage in the broader spectrum of life, I think the biggest need that I needed to have a story of how God works in the world that was broad enough to include all of the seasons and stages of a woman's life. And we can say of a man's life too. Like I didn't need my hand to be held, but I needed a story that was compelling and broad enough to include mine in it. And so that is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this conversation that we host at Women Working Calling, because at its core, it's inviting women and men into a broader understanding of the gospel. I was talking with some ministry leaders yesterday, and we were challenging them to shift from seeing the work of Christ in the world as personal, of I have sin in my life through the death and resurrection of Christ, it's forgiven and I'm restored to God. That is certainly a core foundational heart of the gospel, but really like it's the entire story of scripture of how God designed the world to be, and humankind's role in it, the role that sin has played in distorting and stepping away from what God intends. And Christ as, the great restorer through his death and resurrection, he's making all things new. And so suddenly our response to Christ is both personal and cosmic in its scope, which means that our work is the lived work of the gospel, not necessarily the words of salvation, but the renewing work of Christ in the world. And so when I got that bigger story, my life suddenly had scope and purpose, and there was room for me in it. And I think every woman and man needs that bigger story. And what I love about it is it's big enough for anyone, regardless of their stage of life or even the seasons. Like I think about you, Jane, as a mom, like you're life and your leadership will ebb and flow depending on whatever is happening at that moment of family life. And there's a beauty to having a story that's big enough for the ebbs and flows and rises and falls of what we experience in life with God in the world.
Before we take a short break, Joanna has shared some powerful insights into how her journey as a single woman has shaped her perspective on her faith and her calling. When we return, we'll dive into her book, Women Work and Calling, where Joanna explores how we can embrace a broader imagination of what it means to lead boldly. You are not going to want to miss the deets of this conversation, so you're going to want to stick around. Are you ready to lead more boldly in your career? Join us on October 18th in Carrollton, Texas for the Boldly Conference, where faith meets professional excellence. This isn't just another women's conference. It's a transformative event for your professional and leadership development, designed to help you integrate your faith into every aspect of your work. At Boldly, we're gathering women who are ready to grow, lead, and make an impact. Through inspiring keynotes and practical workshops and deep connections, you're going to gain tools you need to lead with confidence and purpose. Whether you're climbing the corporate ladder or seeking to lead with more intention, Boldly is your opportunity to bridge the gap between the sacred and the secular, letting your faith guide you in making a lasting difference. Go ahead and mark your calendar for October 18th at Bent Tree Bible in Carrollton, Texas. Tickets are on sale now. You can secure your spot today and take the next step in your leadership journey. Visit boldlyconference.com to learn more and purchase your tickets. Don't miss out on this chance to invest in your future professionally and spiritually. Joanna Meyer's book, Women Work and Calling, invites us to expand our understanding of what it means to lead boldly in our vocations. More specifically, Joanna challenges us to cultivate a vocational imagination.
When we're talking about vocation, it's simply another word for describing call. Often we get hung up on what's a call, what's a vocation, as if a vocation is something special. When we talk about vocational imagination, it's understanding with scope and creativity the context of our response to God. He calls us to life with Him, to a life of discipleship and service to others. And so we go, okay, how do I have imagination for what that means in the context of where I live and lead? And that's a different skill. I think about our local churches and often our women's ministries, and we do a great job in so many ways. There's great examples of teaching women to understand Scripture. It's great programs encouraging spiritual disciplines or relational enrichment, and virtually nothing speaking to women's roles in public life. It's not just a paycheck earning job, but it's the way that we engage the created world outside of our own physical bodies. And that takes some imaginations. And so it starts with that framework of thinking about how is God at work in the world? And then the imagination piece comes in from knowing yourself in your context. So it's saying, okay, I know that we are in this cosmic journey of beauty and brokenness, that we know that the world has been distorted by sin. We know that through Christ, all things are being in the process of made right until the final day when everything that was accomplished through Christ will be fulfilled. We know we're in that kind of messy middle of God making all things new. And so you kind of go, okay, and my life is in it. So what has God entrusted to me? And that could be your relationships and your sphere of influence. It could be actual power through the job that you have, financial resources, reputation. You might have access to communications channels. All of us have this unique matrix of things that go into us having influence. And so we stand in the place that we are and say, okay, what could God be doing here? How do I have an imagination for how God might work? And then what are the tools that I have to engage that? And when women's minds begin to go to those places, we begin to see our power and influence unlocked in new ways. And one thing I love about it is that this is something that can be accessible to any woman with rare exceptions. I'm thinking of women who might be enslaved in the far corners of the world, where they don't have a lot of agency in life. But for many women, we have varying degrees of agency. And even if it's small, we have the ability to be faithful in stewarding what we have. So you could be a younger career woman on the bottom of the career ladder within your organization, and you still have the ability to influence, even if it's just influencing your own self or your attitude or the way that you engage your team, or an idea for how you can serve customers better or address something that is not God honoring or broken within your corporation. We all have opportunities to either push back the darkness of changing ways that sin has affected the world, or to amplify the goodness and attributes of God, not just by singing praise songs or reciting a Bible verse at work, but through the nature of the substance itself. Like, for example, if you're in management, that's holy work. That's very holy work. You have the opportunity to build teams that help people flourish. And that's a way that honors God. And so the imagination is knowing yourself and your place and having a vision for how God might work through you in that space.
Mm-hmm. I like to think of this, is broadening the definition of what we think a mission field is.
Totally.
Too, right? Like, when you were talking, it brought to mind, I led a small group of women who work in my church, and we were going through one of our faith and work studies that we offer through Polished, and somebody was sharing a challenge or that they were experiencing at work, and they're like, "Oh, but it doesn't matter because I'm not a pastor at a church. It does, I'm not on mission because I'm not, and they were naming off like our lead pastors." And I was like, hold up, like your work does matter, because like you had just shared, like you were trying to create work cultures where people can flourish. Like there was a management issue actually that she was dealing with. And she, and I think we need to just stop like belittling the challenges that we're experiencing and realize, like you said, what we've been entrusted with. Like we've all been entrusted with something, and nothing is too small to make that a great impact in the kingdom if we do it well, right? Yeah. I don't know. I just find such encouragement in that, especially, with the challenge of broadening our imaginations in the work that we do. And I don't know. I just, that's the opportunity I see through the work that you're doing, and the work that Polished is doing, just kind of like helping people to see like God is inviting you, because his mission field is everywhere. It's everywhere for sure.
And don't you want Christian women to have a seat at the table to create good in the world?
Yes.
Let's disciple women for the large swaths of our life that are happening. I just say public life because it's that generous description. It's not just paycheck earning work. It's the way that we engage our world and our community. And like, don't you want women to be engaged in those spaces?
Yeah. Well, I sure do. Yeah. Exactly. And I mean, that's what we were created to do alongside men. Like we were supposed to work in partnership with God to, create from this vast palette of potential of creation that he's led us to. And I just, I agree. We need to broaden that vocational imagination and really lean into where God's leading us. Another thing I love about in your book, in part 2, you talk about this idea of building strength from within. And this was my favorite chapter, talked about how God grows our soul through our work. Like, I don't know what the Holy Spirit's doing, but like since the beginning of this year, I've been invited by the Holy Spirit and God to engage in this conversation with him of like, what does it look like for my soul to grow? What does it look like to care for my soul? Like, and I don't know, when I read that chapter, I said, all right, I'm leaning in, I'm listening because
I love it.
It just felt like it was just in addition, because I feel like, and I think this goes along with the whole faith and work integration conversation here, that we compartmentalize our life so easily. Yeah. But we are really an integrated whole. Our heart, soul, mind, and strength is what we're supposed to love God with, all of it. Yep. And it's all connected. And if I'm not incorporating habits or practices in my life that really feed into my soul, because the soul's kind of like, I feel like at the core of it, or it encompasses it all.
Yeah.
But I feel like that kind of can get swept away to, well, that's just the spiritual health side of things. Like, no, it's like everything. But I don't know. Could you share with our audience like how God grows our soul through our work? Because I don't think we talk about this enough.
Well, and I love that you're on this journey. How exciting. It'd be fun to
I
see
know.
in 5 years, like where you are.
Yeah.
So I think it is an alternative to some of the models that we see of what it looks like to be a faithful Christian. Like so often in our faith communities, or if you're involved in like a parachurch ministry or something like that, often the model that we see is additive, where we say, okay, you individual have a relationship with God, and then to be growing in faithfulness, you need to add on these things. It could be like Sunday worship, participation in a small group. We have praise and worship nights like every 6 weeks in my church, and we want you to do that. We want you to volunteer with one of our community partners, and we want you to share your faith with your colleagues. So pretty soon you have this long list of things to add to your life that are a model of faithfulness. And so imagine, we're going to guesstimate half of your waking hours are spent at work, and then you have commitments to your family, and then you have church, and you think, well, any extra growth or impact is going to have to squeeze in that tiny little slice of the pie that's left.
Right.
And what we're talking about is not additive. We're talking about integrative, meaning that we are living with God in all of life. And that means that we acknowledge that God is as present with you in the workplace as he is in a moment of devotion at home or in a church worship service. And that's really hard because it pushes our boundaries of saying, like, do I really believe that God is with me in a difficult meeting with my boss? And yes, he is. And so we acknowledge God's presence as the starting point. And then we say, what are the unique pressures or opportunities for me to connect with God's presence in this place? So it could be, I think in my own life, I can make my work an idol. I may not acknowledge that verbally, but in the lifestyle habits, the way that I have a tendency to overwork, or the way that I find my identity in my work, too much than I should, that's idolatry. And so formation can happen when I say, God, what does it look like to trust you with my own limitations, or trust you to find my identity in you rather than my accomplishments at work? That's formation that's happening through the job. So it could be idolatry, or it could be fear or anxiety. It could be distraction, any of those kind of temptations that keep us from being fully present and connected with God, are opportunities for us to develop habits that can lead us back to him. And so in the book, we talk about just some formational practices. It could be something as simple as, one that I like because it's very easy to practice for anyone, is the idea of breath prayers, where if you have something that you find triggering at work, you can choose to offer a moment of connection back to the Lord through the rhythm of you breathing. And you just have a phrase on the inhale and a phrase that you pray on the exhale. And just the motion of breathing in and out for 5 cycles and just being present before the Lord can often reset your mind. So it could be something like, Lord Jesus Christ could be your inhale, and your exhale could be, have mercy on me, a sinner. And that's like one of the most classic historic ones, but you can write your own, or you could use the rhythm of a psalm that has a lovely 2-phrase cadence, and just breathe in, breathe out, and you pray that. And it allows you just to reset your heart and mind. And that's that beautiful connection of practice and pressure of how God is shaping you in work that helps that growth go. And we all have those pressures at work. They're unique to each of us. And so what a gift to be present before the Lord and saying, help me grow in these things.
Yeah, no, I love that. And especially, I would say breath prayer is a thing I've been trying to incorporate. I've been experimenting with, and it's been helping because, I will also recommend going in the Psalms for that, because like you said, there's just, like verses that just go together. And sometimes I'm like, that verse was for me, or these 2 lines were for me today. And it's like, you just breathe it in and breathe it out. And there's something about that practice that focuses and grounds you in those moments where, because for me, it's anxiety. I get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I get anxious, and then I start taking the whole world on my shoulders. And then I'm reminded, no, this is a partnership with God, and I'm not meant to do this alone, and to trust Him. I feel like our conversation keeps coming back to this.
Yeah.
Do we trust Him? Do we trust God in every aspect of our life? And He wants to go there. You can do breath prayers at work. Like, you could be having a very chaotic, terrible day and you can pause in your cubicle and just, take a moment to remind yourself, right? Like,
Yep.
I'm not alone in here. God's here with me.
I was just talking to a friend who, and I'm guessing listeners may have had moments like this, where she got an email meeting invitation from a supervisor that didn't have any explanation, and a member of the HR team was connected to the meeting, and she was panicking. She goes, I think I'm getting fired. She goes, I don't think I have any reason by my behavior or performance to indicate that would be the case. But just the way this meeting invite came through makes me worry that this is happening. And I thought, oh, that's familiar to many people probably. And that is just a reality of how do we deal with anxiety and trusting God's goodness and presence in that moment.
Yeah, that's so good, and that's so hard.
I know. I wouldn't wish that moment on anyone.
No.
Yeah. I've been fired in my life, and so I just know that feeling, and I just think God is very close in those moments if we've helped our hearts know that He is there.
Yeah, and that's the power of God's word, isn't it? Mm-hmm. To remind us of that. That's so. Again, it's so encouraging to hear that God wants to grow our souls through our work, and just He shows up. He's honestly, He's there. Yeah. Will we turn and invite Him into the conversation? That's where I kind of
don't miss out on the goodness of what God has for you by bringing Him into your work.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and another part of your book that I found interesting was you talk about navigating common workplace challenges. In particular, you call out the double bind, which I found interesting. Could you share that with us, what it means and how we navigate it well when we find ourselves in that situation?
Yeah. I don't know if I have solutions yet on navigating it well, because it's tough. It's a hard one. It's the idea that when it comes to leading as a woman, it can be difficult because our stereotypes, and I want to be very clear, we're talking about stereotypes, but stereotypes come from somewhere and they have an impact. So often in organizational or corporate settings, our perception of what makes an effective leader tend to fall along gendered lines. We can associate them with masculinity. And these are based on academic research studies. So know that there's data behind it. So we might associate a stereotypically strong leader as someone who's assertive or carries themselves a certain way or is decisive or unafraid of conflict or things like that. Things that you might stereotypically associate as being male. And so women can be viewed as a lesser leader because they don't match that stereotype. The bind happens is that, like, a woman might on her performance review say, I need to see that you're more assertive. And when a woman steps into some of those more stereotypical qualities that are associated with leadership, she gets critiqued for working against the stereotype of what a woman should be like. And so a performance review might say, be more assertive, but when you are assertive, you're viewed as aggressive. And so assertiveness is not as well received in feminine packaging as it is in masculine packaging. And so the bind is you could be viewed as being either likable, like, wow, she's great, she's a good teammate, or competent, but it's difficult to be both, where it's like, man, she's a leader, but like, she's also a bee. I'm just, and realize that these are stereotypes. And yet I do think that there's some truth to them. And so it's hard to know how to get out of it. A couple things that I would recommend. One is it really helps to be in conversation with other women that have navigated this. You're not alone if you're facing this challenge. And so seeking out older women or peers who can dialogue about this with you of like, what are the moments when you've experienced and how have you responded? A single best, most helpful thing is to be in conversation with people about it. Another practical tool comes from there's two sides to it. One is really knowing yourself. Like, what is it about your leadership that even though we know that these feminine attributes actually make for great leaders, and that companies that prioritize women in senior levels of leadership perform better because of the amazing gifts that they bring. But they're talking perceptions here. Knowing yourself, like, what is it that is making you be perceived as a weaker leader? And then actively looking for opportunities to strategically work against that stereotype. That doesn't mean, like, for example, if people want you to be more assertive, that doesn't mean that you suddenly start stomping around the office like a man, like hands on your shoulders and like boldly expressing your opinions. Like, we're not talking about fundamentally changing who you are, but we are saying, hey, are there strategic opportunities that you could capitalize on that would demonstrate the piece that is perceived as missing? I can think in my own life, decisiveness. I tend to be an information gatherer, so I rarely regret a decision once I've made it. But for me, I'm getting a ton of input. I'm getting lots of opinions. I'm doing my research, and it can look, I've realized even in my role at Denver Institute, it can look like I'm not decisive. Like, I'm like, won't you, big man, tell me what you think about this decision? And that's not it at all. It's like, I know I have gaps in my understanding. You have a different way of seeing this scenario. And I want your input because it's going to factor in my final decision. I've had to actively say to my colleagues, when I ask your opinion, don't think I'm being indecisive. I actually am soliciting broader wisdom than my own. You better believe I'm going to make a decision on this and in a timely fashion. But the way that I get there is different than the way that you get there. And so I had to verbalize that recently in a team building session because I got this sense of like my boss saying, well, we want you to make this decision. I'm like, yeah, I want to make this decision too, but I'm soliciting input before I do. And so it's taken a while. It's taken me being very studious about how I was being perceived in my leadership and then addressing it head on if I needed to. And so that would be my tip is like, you don't have to fundamentally change who you are, but you do need to know how you present. And if you need to, address it.
It goes back to this idea that I keep kind of stewing on is that strong leadership is a self-aware leader.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
You have to be very self-aware on how, because you know how you are taking in the world and how you're perceiving others. But I don't know. I heard this question once, and it really challenged me to be like, how are other people perceiving me? Like in the way I act or talk or react to things, and not that I have to be, a people pleaser by any means, but being aware of like, I don't know, being aware of just like how I interact with people, or if I appear timid, or if I ask a question, don't automatically go to the place of, I don't know, like, oh, I'm bothering them. But no, like the don't count them out before you ask the question. But even just moments where like, maybe I don't want to make a decision in the moment and I don't make the decision. It's like, is that coming off as I don't care? Or, instead of wanting to communicate like, hey, I just need a little more time to think about it. I don't know. But just the self-awareness piece of, I think that's just so crucial for all of us, especially as we learn and grow in our leadership, as our roles change and shift and relationships change and shift within the places we work. Final part of the book, you talk about cultivating these purposeful relationships. So, sometimes that can feel like a complex thing to navigate within our workplaces, because there's lots of different personalities in the marketplace. There's lots of personalities anywhere you go, but it's this call to cultivate like purposeful relationships. How do we do that? Someone who may be feeling like an outsider, maybe that's listening right now, and they want to cultivate better relationships with the people they work with, but they just kind of feel stuck. How would we go about doing that?
I think I'd come at it two ways. One is thinking about how you approach networking, and then thinking about how you approach mentoring. Because I think we have stereotypes of both that don't serve us well. So when we think about how we build relational networks, at its core, it's building mutually beneficial relationships. I think sometimes the hesitancy that women have is that they don't want to be seen as over-askers or to be cheesy, like they're coming in with an agenda for a relationship. And I have benefited from women who are relationally generous, meaning that they are people that are trustworthy in their relationships. Like they're regarded as someone who is always considering the benefit of others professionally through their interactions. And so they win trust by people. They're not cheesy. They're not manipulative. They don't have an agenda, but they are available and generous towards others. And that's their way of being in the world. And they're connected. You know, they've seen the value of relationships. And so they have these networked relationships. When we can make that shift from like the agenda or the cheesiness of networking to realize like, hey, I'm showing up and I always want to know, like, what could I potentially offer to this person? It changes the way that dynamic feels. And you'll find that people reciprocate. I even will verbalize that. If I'm maybe considering a ministry partnership, I'll say, I want this to be a mutually beneficial relationship. So what do you need from us? What do you need from me? How can I most help you? And here's what I could use from you. And so there's that mutuality goes a long way. And so really training yourself to take the initiative and be brave and also to pursue mutual benefit will change the way that you build relationships with the others. And you'll be amazed at the power that comes from healthy networks. And then I would say also rethink maybe what a standard model of mentoring looks like. As I talk to younger women, without fail, they'll say, I am looking for someone to mentor me. And I think what is at the heart of that is I want to find someone that's older or more mature that one-on-one can offer wisdom. Kind of, we use that metaphor of pouring into me. I'm looking for someone that'll pour into me. And my challenge would be to shift from looking for that one person to start looking for what my friend Laura Flanders calls a constellation of relationships, meaning that we can be intentional about seeking wise input in our lives. But we're actually better served by having a sparkly sky of a handful of key people that are available to you. And that may not be a standing weekly appointment as much as it is a mutually beneficial relationship where you are intentional about being in relationship with each other, but it doesn't have to happen all the time. My friend Laura, who I just mentioned, is a mentoring expert. And I don't sit down with Laura all that often, but when we sit down, it's always intentional. And she is committed to hearing my challenges or questions, and it's just available. And it's very open-handed in the sense that I am not coming to her to meet all of my relational or professional needs. I have an intentional, specific reason why I want to be with her, and I'll ask generously for a little bit of her time, but I'm open-ended. It's not this like heavy expectation. And you'll be amazed when you ask specifically and in a defined way, like the time that you're asking for is respectful of another person, you'll be surprised at how generous people are. And I've seen other friends do that. And simply by changing their expectations for how they gather input and wisdom in their life has really been transformational and has opened new doors to them to grow their professional networks and their friendships. And so that would be a challenge I would have for listeners like, hey, I recognize this desire you have. I think there are a lot of different ways you can get it met.
That's so good. That's so good. I love that constellation of relationships. That's, and the intention behind that, because we can help each other. You know, we just need to take that first step. And sometimes the first step is the hardest step to take towards someone, for sure. And man, if you have appreciated the insights that Joanna has shared, you're going to love her book, Women Work in Calling. For real, I'm endorsing this.
Thank you, Jane.
It was just so encouraging. I love just all your insights and the ways you think about our vocations and our calling as women. We're going to push pause here for a moment to share with you ways to engage with the Polish Network, but don't go anywhere because we're gearing up for another round of Ask Me Anything when we get back. Can you guess who our mystery question curator could be? Here's a hint. Her expertise helps women find their voice in the workplace no matter the challenge. Find out who it is when we get back. Are you looking to grow as a leader while connecting with like-minded women in your area? It's time for you to discover the monthly Polished Chapter Gatherings. At Polished, we're on a mission to embolden women in their faith and work. Our gatherings are designed for women just like you, driven professionals who seek connection, development, and the truth of the gospel. Each meeting features inspiring guests, opportunities to share experiences, and meaningful connections with others who share your values. It's more than a gathering. It's a community of support and growth. Whether you're looking to enhance your professional skills, deepen your faith, or simply connect with others on a similar journey, Polished Chapter Gatherings offer the connection you crave, the development you deserve, and the gospel-centered encouragement you need. Visit polishednetwork.org/chapters to find a chapter near you and join us for the next gathering. Together, let's grow, inspire, and lead with purpose. Welcome back, friends, to the Polished Podcast. We hope you're enjoying our insightful discussion with today's guest, Joanna Meyer. But now, let's add a splash of spontaneity and a sprinkle of fun to the show. It's time for Ask Me Anything. I love the different responses whenever I do that. Well, Joanna, here is how Ask Me Anything works. We are about to uncover the woman behind the profession, the quirks behind your expertise. And I've received 3 questions from one of our recent podcast guests that I've interviewed. And your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to answer these questions to give us a deeper insight to yourself. Are you game?
Yes.
All right. Well, today's questions were curated by Elaine Lynn Herring. She is the author of Unlearning Silence, How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully. She is a speaker, an author, and a facilitator, and she is just a rock star human being. So I'm really excited to hear your response to her questions. So, question 1.
It's especially hard on teams when leadership teams aren't in sync with each other. What's your advice on navigating turf wars between leaders?
Oh, that is a big question.
Yes, she's a very deep well.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'd say about turf wars, I feel like I've seen it play out in good and bad ways in corporate life. And when it is happening in bad ways, you feel like not just individuals are competitive with each other, but entire divisions of the organization develop attitudes towards other teams and divisions. And it can get toxic really fast. And so I really appreciate the question. I have seen a couple of friends in leadership do it really well. And it comes from the top. It comes from forging those mutually beneficial relationships with your peer and enforcing it in the habits of your team. It's very easy for attitudes towards others to shift and continually kind of get bad. I even find that in my own work. If I'm not careful, I can build up an attitude towards another organization or something like that isn't generous. And when leaders do that and allow that to filter down into the culture of their teams, pretty soon the whole team has a chip on their shoulder towards your competitor or the other division in the company. And so I think it starts with your hard attitude, but it has to play out in the attitudes of what you allow, the type of language that you allow, and whether you choose to address it or not towards your competitors. You can't control your competitors' behavior, but you can choose the type of attitude you will have as a leader and within your group.
All right. I love that. Question 2.
How do you lead authentically when everyone else around you is different? For example, leading as a woman in a male-dominant environment.
I think you have to know I think you have to know the lay of the land in yourself so well. So you're going to go into that situation where it's mostly men at work and you're going to say, okay, is there a secret sauce that I can bring as a woman in this situation? There's certain feminine attributes that actually will be good for this team and situation. And I'm going to stick with those. I'm going to make sure those are present. That's what I'm going to choose to bring. And then you're going to look for any behavior that will be counterproductive. A friend of mine refers to that as a sticky floor, where often we think of women's advancement of having a glass ceiling. And then my friend Katie Cole describes it as a sticky floor. Like women through their own choices can limit their growth because their feet are stuck. You can't blame it on other people if you're not willing to address it in yourself. And so I would do some hard thinking of just saying, like, what are counterproductive behaviors for me to display as a woman in this situation? And I don't think that means fundamentally changing who you are. It's knowing what cards to play in that situation. And so it might be like in my own journey of like, I can't solicit input from my team as much as I would like. I need to just like shut up and make this decision myself, because it's not helping me to continue in this behavior. So it's kind of knowing yourself and just really guarding against whatever behaviors are going to make you look not functional in that situation.
That's good. I love that. Well, we have made it to question 3.
Yeah.
Joanna. And here it is. Question 3.
What's the biggest leadership mistake you've made? And what did you learn from it?
I think, and this is a more generalized question, I can give you a specific example, but not being aware of habits or grooves I was allowing to develop in my life. I often think in terms of grooves. Like if we're not careful, you can have a certain mindset or a certain behavior or reactivity that comes out consistently in situations. And it becomes a groove. It's your way of responding and engaging. I was catching myself doing something this morning, and I'm glad I didn't respond to a coworker before I had caught it, because my response would have been unproductive and reinforcing a negative perception that I don't want to reinforce. And so I had to look at that and say, like, gosh, this groove of how I react in situations like this is deep. And I want to behave differently and lead differently. And so I'm going to change that. And so the biggest mistakes I've made have been allowing those grooves to get too deep and last for too long. And I think for like in leadership, this isn't everybody's leadership situation, but for me, there's been a season where I function more like a solopreneur, and other times where I'm like, oh no, my leadership is not just influence, it's happening through teams, and not shifting from a solopreneur to a team leader. Thankfully, I've caught that early enough in a couple situations, but I could look at that from a distance and being like, oh, that's going to be the most self-defeating groove if I get stuck in it.
That's wow. You are a self-aware leader for sure. I love it.
I'm stumbling forward, I think is how it's going. So
yeah, stumbling forward,
tripping in those grooves.
I think we all can experience that for sure. And I love that picture of grooves. That's a good mental image of that. Well, Joanna, I really appreciate you sharing with us and taking a chance on these questions. And here's the thing, friends, we want you to join the conversation too. Do you have a burning question or a curious musing? Maybe you have a wild wondering about our guests. Now is your chance to be part of the action. You can go to our website at polishnetwork.org and submit your questions there. Become a Polish Podcast MVP and get a mention plus insight into your favorite guests. Send those questions in today. Are you a working woman looking to elevate your leadership this year? Polish Collaboratories could be your next right step in moving forward in your leadership development. Polish Collaboratories are small groups modeled after executive peer groups, yet available to working women at all levels of leadership. Collaboratory members dive into leadership training with a faith-forward perspective for 12 months. This is your opportunity to tap into diverse perspectives, conquer challenges, and achieve your goals in a united sisterhood. New groups are launching in 2024. We want you to be a part of it. So go to polishnetwork.org/collaboratories to learn more. So, Joanna, as we are landing this plane on leading boldly and women working calling, the one thing I just keep coming back to is that all our work matters, and our work is expressed in so many different ways. How do we affirm each other's unique expression of work? How can we encourage one another, affirm it, all the things?
That's a killer question. I think it is shifting the types of conversations that we have as women. So sometimes that's in church circles that when we regard work as a place of mission and discipleship, of course we want to be talking about that. And so if like ministry leaders are listening, you don't have to be an expert in work, but you do want to be curious about the working lives of your women. And so you honor them by taking a deep interest in their working lives. And so start doing that. Just become a student of the full lives of the women you serve. But in our conversations with each other, I think it's putting it on the table. Like I was out for Indian food with a couple girlfriends this week, and even though we're friends and we talk about all kinds of things, the three of us had a very hard conversation on time management and the choices that we were making and strategies that they were using. And it wasn't life hacky. It was like heart stuff of like, why are you overworking? What changes are you going to make? How can I help you in this? Like, it was a really rich conversation that was both practical, supportive as friends, and spiritual. It was rich. And so I think that's the biggest tip is like, get the people in your life that you need to start having those conversations.
I love that. And that again, it's another encouragement of just find your people and build those relationships one conversation at a time for sure. Is there an actionable step or a daily practice our listeners could use to help cultivate boldness in their leadership as they move forward?
I'd say start by really clarifying the influence that you uniquely have. And there's some women who are listening who are probably very experienced leaders, and they may have done this process already. But if someone is a younger leader or developing professionally, I'd say get to know yourself and know the unique levers that God has given you to pull. And that is through your personality. That's through your situation and the resources that you have. It's also through the need that's in front of you. Like, learn what those levers are and get really good at pulling them, because that's where you get kingdom influence. And that's part of godly influence, is knowing yourself and your situation. And it also means asking God, like, God, how would you have me see this situation? There are opportunities to encourage flourishing in any job. And so inviting God in to say, help me see the situation with your eyes is key.
That's awesome. Yes, I totally agree, Joanna. That's awesome. Just know what God has given you, what he's entrusted with you with, and where he's calling you to lead. Well, I've just really appreciated all your insights, and I thank you so much for coming on and sharing. Before we wrap things up, are there any resources you could point us to as we continue to learn how to lead boldly?
Well, I love that you recommended the Women Work and Calling book, and welcome people to look at womenworkandcalling.com. We're kind of a sister organization, Spirit to the Polished Network, so it's really fun to be collaborators in this space. I would recommend Amy Sherman's book, Kingdom Calling, Vocational Stewardship for the Common Good. It's very accessible and practical, and some of the best. I've touched on themes that Amy talks about in our conversation today.
Awesome. We will be sure to link all that in our show notes for this episode so our listeners can refer to that. And before we sign off, how can people connect with you or follow you in the work that you do?
Follow me
your
on
website.
Find me on LinkedIn. I'm at Joanna Meyer. You'll see me.
All right. Awesome. We'll link to that as well. Well, again, thank you so much, Joanna, for coming on and sharing with us today. We just really appreciate you and the work that you do.
So great to be with you.
As we wrap up today's conversation on leading boldly, we've been reminded that bold leadership isn't about having all the answers, nor is it always knowing the way forward. It's about responding to God's call, stepping into spaces where we're invited, and trusting that his plans are bigger than our own. Whether it's navigating our careers, our personal lives, or the challenges we face in our faith communities, leading boldly requires courage, faith, and a willingness to embrace the unknown. Do you have a takeaway or a question from today's conversation? If so, let us know. Share your thoughts for this episode on our Instagram post, or if you're watching on YouTube, in the comments below. Let's continue this dialogue on leading boldly. As we wrap up this episode, I want to express our heartfelt gratitude to everyone who plays a role in making the Polished Podcast a reality. The Polished Podcast is made possible in part by the generous support of Coca-Cola Consolidated. Thank you to Joanna Meyer for inspiring us to expand our vocational imaginations, and boldly pursue the callings and the work that God has set before us. To our loyal listeners, your unwavering support and engagement drive us to deliver content that resonates and emboldens. Thank you, Polish Network, for creating a nurturing community where women in the workforce can thrive and connect. A big thank you to White Oak Christian Church for their partnership and contributions to the production of these episodes. Leading boldly means we have a choice: to take up the space where God invites us, or to stay silent. As we consider what we bring to the table and how God is calling us forward, it begs the question:
don't you want women to be engaged in those spaces?
If you're seeking a supportive community for your faith and work journey, I'd love to encourage you to join us on social media and our YouTube channel. Stay updated with our latest content by liking, subscribing, and taking a moment to rate and review the Polish Podcast. You can do that on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Your engagement means so much, and it helps us create content that's meaningful to you. But until next time, friends, this is Jane Doerman signing off. Keep moving forward and stay emboldened.